Hi everyone, good afternoon. So yeah, I'm gonna give a talk. I will talk a bit about data standards interoperability. I have to say it's more of a open question talk. So yeah, it's a bit like considerations and even talking to you to try to find what the tendency is and where to go. But yeah, just to give a little bit of a outline. So what I want to talk about is interoperability in the sense, we have research output, we have research activities, but we need them to show impact. So the importance of impact, how we can connect research to impact, what is data interoperability in itself, and why is it that it's important that we wanted and needed? What is the role of a CRIS, so of Pure, in facilitating the transfer and use of data? And why is there a need, or what need do we have for a standard format or standard metadata? So, again, when we talk about research and open knowledge-based research activities, research output, we talk about these outputs in relation to the impact that research has on society, on other research, on the world in general. So what we want to be able to do, so we need to find a way, and it's very important to be able to connect research outputs and different contents that are also between each other and to the impact then they then have. So to demonstrate the impact that they have. So how do we do this? So how can we get first access to all of this data, and then connections and links between this data, and then also be sure that we are identifying and understanding the data correctly. Can you see the diagram? Okay, so in this slide, I simply show, so this in the diagram you see on the right, this shows a little bit the workflow of research and how this can get, so this was a study that was done, sorry, I don't remember because I have, okay, so it's from a report from the UK, I don't remember exactly, from, sorry, not the UK, from Novo Nordisk. And what they did was they measured the research that came out, so starting from grants and from grants recipients, they did an analysis to see how many research outputs come out of the different grants and how many patents. So what you can see is in the first step, so you start from grant recipients and then you link these to the articles or to the publications that are that come out from these grants. And then these, they have, in this analysis, they have shown how these outputs are then related to applications. So for example, patents and eventually products that were created in the real world, so that are then used. So this is just to show that it's not enough to have the grant or have the outputs, but we have to be able to move this information along to actually show something. Again, here there's a bit the same type of diagram, but here we go a little bit more in what do we need. So in order to be able to link the data and link it to impact or to other content, what are the requirements that we have for this data? So the two images, the two diagrams that I have, that I'm showing here, show similar approaches and a need for an interoperability between the data and data standards. So the approaches are similar, but slightly different. So what you see on the left is an open-air research graph. And what they show is the importance, so without going in detail through the graph, but the importance of aggregating the data, deduplicating the data, and then enriching it with other content or with other links that you do. What you see on the right is instead a diagram that shows the needs for standards and metadata. So its requirements of the data must be open, so it must be accessible. The enrichments on the data, again, must be known, transparent, open, algorithms, and also where the metadata is being derived. So this highlights two needs that we have in the data that we're using. So, as I said, in order to be able to use the data effectively, you need interoperability and data standards. So you need two types of standards. The first one, you need to have the ability to consistently identify, deduplicate, disambiguate the data that you're looking at, its properties, so that you can understand it and reuse it. The second is that you need to have agreed ways of transferring this data. So protocols and standard data formats that we know. And then the question, so yes, we need to have data standards, but we also need to have control over the standards that we are setting and that we are using for different use cases, for example. It might not always be the same. So first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about persistent identifiers that are one of the 2 points that I have just mentioned. So yeah, in this graph, and here, I know he is not here, but I am citing or showing a tweet from Nick Venstra, who is here at the conference. And what Nick did, I'm sorry that the images are a little bit small, but I think all the slides will be shared. So what Nick did was he took different databases and different repositories. So for example, OpenAir, the NWO, the Dutch knowledge base, and others. And then he saw for the same, for different outputs, and different fields in these outputs. So for example, organizations, persons, or outputs itself. He tried to find in the different bases identifiers that describe the same entities and then combine them together to show how these can be enriched and how by linking all the different information you can create a record that is more complete. And how important it is to be able to have these persistent identifiers and to combine them and assign them to outputs. So I mentioned this also yesterday in the roadmap presentation, but we are currently looking at ORCID, and ORCID in general, so anyone who wants to say no can raise their hand, but I think in general ORCID is the persistent identifier that is accepted by the community as the best PID at this moment. So what you see though, okay, so making the claim that this is the best ID that we have at the moment, what the graph on the right shows is that even in the case of ORCID, things are not perfect. So things are not only perfect, but consistent. So what the graph is showing is, so you have you can see the adoption, the different points or different countries or different regions. So you see the adoption and the engagement of people that are using ORCID, the ID, as an ID. So what you see is that there are countries such as Portugal on the far top right that have a very high adoption and usage of the ORCID ID. And there are still countries that are not yet using it 100%. So even here, even when we have PIDs that are top PIDs or let's say the best, still here the situation is not ideal. So what we need and what we don't have yet, so what we need are also PIDs for and IDs that we can trust, is because, as I mentioned before, we want to be able, especially when we're using different systems, different sources, different databases, we need to be able to deduplicate the data that we're bringing in and also disambiguate this data. So there are many, many groups around that are trying to tackle this problem. And we see that most of the time and effort, even in institutions or in research centers, whatever, is put in actually curating. So making sure that the data that is coming in and that represents the institution is correct. So, and we also want to ensure that there needs to be a set in the data that we are using, and in the data we need to be able to define a minimum set of data that we need. So yeah, we can have, so the idea would be, can we have a data format or a schema and have some field that we have as requirements? So we know you need to have an organization, you need to have a person, like a certain number of fields that need to be filled in because these fulfill the requirements of different needs and different situations. And then, of course, you can have additional fields that are not necessarily filled in, might be in one case or not in another, but there should be a core that is there. What you see in the graph, but again, it's a bit small. So here, this was a survey that was done to measure like the importance or how much people do, yes or no, certain things. And the ones I have squared in red is how many release a data set with a license. And you can see that still, so the yellow part is never or not often, it's still very large compared. So this is still not something that people are doing. And the second one is how many acquire or put persistent identifiers on their data, so on their research outputs, on their data set. And even here, you can see that the majority is still not there. So going into interoperability, what is interoperability? So we all understand the basic concept. So what we want and what interoperability aims to achieve and provide is to have access, explore, understand the structure of content, of research activities, outputs, and release data so that we can reuse it. This means not only just to have a standard format or standard metadata that can be read by all, but more at the basis, it means to understand what the needs of the community are, because I mentioned it before, but not necessarily the data is being used in the same way for different needs. So it can be that if I'm talking about funding, then I need something. If I'm talking about administration, I need something else. So I think we have to so maybe we have to shift a bit. We have been talking so much about setting standard data, having one standard, one format, but instead maybe we should more be looking at, can we understand what the needs are, and can we classify in what way we can represent them, and we can fulfill them, satisfy them. So what is the value of a CRIS in this, and where does Pure, in our case, come in, but CRIS come in? So the CRIS in itself provides, as you know, extensive functionality for the management, reporting, and showcases of your research activities and outputs. And what we do in particular, what the CRIS does, is it facilitates or guarantees the highest possible, or we work to guarantee the highest possible data quality, and also facilitates data interoperability. How? So the one thing we do in Pure, or in general in CRIS, is use common standards, common data formats, standard data formats, and protocols for data exchange. So in particular, we support OAI PMH. Then we have support for different types of research data. So award funding information or funding content, research output, data sets that we can link together. And then we have we provide a mapping to a common data model. And then, of course, a CRIS also includes or provides system integrations. So it makes it easy to gather the outputs that you have and the content that you have in one place, even when you're using or you're looking for it in different systems. So in Pure, we said it again in yesterday's roadmap, and I think Thomas also mentioned in his presentations, we focus on the 5 C's of data quality. And now let's see if I remember. So the data wants to be correct, complete, current, compliant, and connected. Yes. So we focus on the data quality, and we also work, and this is in particular my part, on integrations with external and internal systems. So we have connections with external data sources, or with your own HR, budgeting, data management plans, so all different systems that you might use. We try to enrich and relate the content that you bring into Pure. So we have several functionality to connect content or enrich content coming from the same content that comes from different sources, for example. So we try to create the most complete record that you can have. And we provide a way of registering and storing your data. Going back to interoperability, I mentioned it before, but we also have support in Pure for standard formats. I will go more in detail in the next slides, and for exchange protocols as like OAI PMH. So going back to the initial problem, so we talk about data. Yeah, I here put a comic that I like a lot from XKCD that I think explains perfectly the situation that we have, because we need a data format. We want one standard data format, but maybe we cannot have it. Like going back to what I was saying before, maybe for different purposes and different use cases, you need a different format. So we struggle and we strive to continue to unify everything in a one format that rules them all, but maybe this is not the correct way to go. Going a little bit into Pure and talking a little bit about the work that we've been doing this year, a lot is discovery and will continue also in next year. So what I have listed here is the several data formats. So in Pure, we do support a number of standard data formats, so mods, serif, Dublin Core, NLDiddle, and also DDF XD from Denmark, SweepUp. So we have a number of formats that we support. We find it very difficult. In the image on the right, it's just excerpts, I don't know, of how these formats look, so how the fields look. And we struggle and we notice, and this is a work that we've started to do, it's difficult for us in Pure to maintain these formats up to date. So we can keep adding support for data formats, but then it becomes very, you require a lot of resources and a lot of attention to keep all of these like current add when we need to add or not. So, and we see that actually in these data formats, and we did a lot of work this year with OAI PMH, adding fields and for open access compliance, so making sure that, for example, funding information is present in different formats. So what we see is that these different formats often have the same information in them, but in a different form. So can this not somehow be like put in a common way and facilitate or reduce the different things that we have? Sorry, serif, yeah, this is data sets. So it's even between research output data sets. The information is there, but it's just slightly different between each other. What are the challenges? So today we have more, in the world there exists more than 40 different metadata standards. The policies are changing. So we have these standards, but the policies continue to change. And this every time leads to new requirements, new metadata, new things that we have to include. So how do we stay up to date with this? How do we classify what the community's needs are? So going back to the different use cases, how can we identify like which are these use cases? How can we find like, okay, now there is something new that is needed by institutions, and how can we address that? So the open question that I mentioned at the beginning is, what should the approach be? Should we, instead of just running after like adding support for formats, should we sit down maybe all together and think like, okay, we're trying to solve these issues. Can we find like common ways of solving these issues and then bring this to a more simplified schema, let's say? And from our side, we continue to work on it. So we continue to look, we're going to do discovery. We started already, and we continue discovery and investigation next year on what the data format. We're already talking to customers. So if you use serif, what do you use it for? What is it that you're looking for there? If you use the Danish data schema, what is it that you're needing there? Can we find commonalities? Can we bring these together? So this is something that we have started investigating in the last releases. We will continue next year. So I will be talking to people and asking questions. And something that we hope, it's a difficult problem, so I don't have the claim of saying we will solve it, but at least maybe we can start moving in a direction that helps also facilitate the complexity of the argument. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's really important to talk about interoperability. I think it's key for many of these solutions, including Pure. So thank you for that, Chiara. So I will just open the floor for questions. Is there any question?
Why not? I'll ask one if no one else will. And it's probably more a comment. This is probably one of the more challenging areas, and I suppose it's reassuring to know that Elsevier and the Pure team are willing to get involved in those conversations. Do you know how far those conversations extend in terms of your competitors, your counterparts who are making Chris systems, and can you actually see any light at the end of the tunnel for this? Because I think your little cartoon described the situation perfectly.
Yeah. So a light at the end, I want to say yes, to not get, but no, we're having conversation at the moment. So we have quite good relations or quite good communication with Serif, for example, the people working on Serif. And it's something that we have talked about and that they're also willing to explore. Like if there is anything that might change because of needs of people. I don't know about competitors. What do you mean of Pure, for example? I don't know what they're doing.
So obviously other Chris manufacturers are going to have a stake in this type of thing as well.
Yeah. But I think there are some. So in my humble opinion, there are some formats that I consider the main ones, if you want. So I think Serif, Dublin Core, are saying mods is something that is widely used and widely spread and will be used by different Chris systems. Also, there are others. I'm sure even the Chris. It depends on the usage. So we have some formats that are quite specific. Even an LDiddle, for example, it's very good. It's very complete. It's a bit specific to the Netherlands. So I think it depends also how the Chris is used, who the institutions that are using it are, and what the needs. But I think there will. So the light I see is that my hope is to be able to get to a point in which you can define maybe a handful of formats that satisfy most of the use cases, and then you already have a coverage. And then of course we will need to see case to case. But yeah, we need to first of all get an idea. I think I'm hopeful. I think if we manage to identify, my approach is more like, let's see what the problem is and how to solve it. Not let's start from let's put everything in this format and then apply it. I think we have a better chance if we go backwards.